Yeah, thank you very much, Laura. Hello, everyone. I'm really glad to be here. We have been partnering with the API the Docs community, now AI the Docs community for a long time, and I'm really glad that we have this cross collaboration sometimes. And it's true, I organize a lot of conferences on APIs. That is shifting also on APIs for AI, so I've prepared some content about that for you all. But yeah, glad to continue this collaboration. There is no an API is as good as its documentation. It will always be the case. But we will see now in the talk I prepared, like, what does that mean to document an API and for who? So that's the question. Who will read the documentation? That's an important part. So I'll go for the most critical part now, which is sharing my whole screen, right? I hope you can see the screen. Don't hesitate to interject, Laura, if that doesn't work properly. Yeah, that's
it's still loading.
Yeah, it's still loading on my side too. So we'll wait maybe for 1 or 2 seconds more. Okay, other option. Okay, I'll just share something else. Just share the Chrome tab. I had a still loading. I have a good enough Wi-Fi, so I don't know what's still loading, but yeah. So I'll start and then try to. We'll see if the slides are catching up. The name of the talk is all your dogs are belong to us, and it comes from, I don't know if people are familiar with the game. Like, it was a game called Zero Wing. It was, yeah, okay. That's slow, but that's coming. Your dogs are belong to us. It's come from a game called Zero Wing, where actually it was a game that became a famous internet meme because of a bad translation. So actually, it was a Japanese game, and let's say when they translated the game into English, there was a big issue, there were big mistakes about English translation, because Japanese and English were more difficult to translate at the time. And so for me, that's just an internet meme about documentation. Why documentation is important, translation, being sure that what's planned and what's delivered is the same. So this is why I wanted to start the presentation with that. On my side, a little bit about me. I organize API conferences. I've built API developer tools. I wrote books on APIs and API management. And currently, I'm a CEO of a company called Olymp, which we do an AI for lawyers, for European lawyers about data protection. So I've been a lot in that space. And if you love memes, this is my starter pack, and this is my Mr. Picture. People call me Mr. Protocol. So yeah, we can continue on that. But I'm glad to try to share what I got on the topic. So all your base belong to us. Again, I recommend the game. It's a fun game, full old retro game. But for me, it's the start of the mass understanding about why it's important to be sure that things that are planned to be delivered will be delivered in the right experience, right? So that's extremely important. So all your dogs are belong to us, or your base are belong to us. If we go back a little bit, I will just do some historical part, because for me, it really has some philosophical and practical understanding elements for the talk today. So we often describe the first tech writers, the first docs writers, as the scribes, right? And for me, the scribes were documenting not just what gods were telling, or what pharaohs wanted to share and deliver, but they were mostly documenting what we call intent. So that's the first step. It was not technical. It was not specifically instructions to be delivered, but it was mostly an intent about interpretation of divine and bureaucratic instructions. So for me today, as a doc writer, you should have a part of keeping that mindset, where you will be documenting not just the technical part, but also the main intent of what needs to be shared, right? Then we go a little bit faster, but there is, for me, a second important part for tech writers, which is the industrial age, where now we are documenting instruction, like specific instructions that needs to be delivered exactly in the right experience. There is no room for interpretation like scribes. There is no room for imagination. This is only room for exact machine descriptions and machine instructions to be sure that it will deliver as expected. So now it's really a translation between engineering and operations, and there is no room for interpretations. And then the last age that we are here, the computer age, for me, it's not about documenting intent or documenting operations. It's about documenting truth. So really, with computers, doc writers becomes really the glue of all documents. It can be about pages, dev guides, whatever. But for me, they're the maintainer of the source of truth, the single source of truth, and that's the more important part of the computer age. So if we go back, it's really about intent, it's really about instructions, and it's also about truth. So for me, that are the three most important words of today as a tech writer. But then what can AI can do for API docs writers, and what API docs writers can do for AI? So that's the main discussion we can have today. I will start by the first part, which for me is the most obvious, is what AI can do for API docs writers. That's the simplest part, and we will see what API docs writer can do for AI, right? So what AI can do for API docs? For me, and many talks today about that, and you had talks yesterday, but for me, it's really about like writing the first draft, right? Being able to produce content, being able to deliver a first set of instructions, and getting off the blank page trauma, right? And be able to write the first thing, and then the role will be to edit documentation that has been generated more than writing, right? Many tools, GitHub Copilot, ChatGPT, OpenAPI specifications, so many things that will be able to have this first draft, right? So I don't think it will replace. I think it's augment. I think it makes things faster. So for me, it's really that we need to keep in mind, right? One concern about all these API doc generation tools, AI enabled. First, AI has no empathy, has no real pedagogy, and they don't understand if audience is understanding or not, right? So it really be really hard for them to interpret what humans will be doing. It can't decide when to not document something. I remind this quote from it's the author of the book Building Microservices, Sam Newman, right? Sam Newman used to tell me that an API is as much as exposing capabilities as much as hiding capabilities. There is an important design decision about what do you expose versus what do you hide. And for me, documentation is also the same. What do you document is as much important what you don't document, what you choose to hide, what you choose to keep for later, or what you don't want to document directly. Because again, the first step of documentation is intent. What do you want to expose? What do you want people to do on top? So again, AI can't understand this intent. And so when to not document something, it's something they can do, right? And also it doesn't know when you're being too technical or not enough technical. It depends on the audience, it depends on people you want to target. They will go as the average, but your audience is not the average. Your audience will be more technical, less technical, depending on use cases, depending on different things you will share. So what AI does to API docs is like generation of work, but the fine-tuning, the quality, the pedagogy will never, at least so far, can't be done yet. So yeah, but even if it can help a lot on the topic, right? So for me, you must see LLMs or AI as runtime interpreters for docs. So this is the interpretation part, right? So now I think the writers needs to think how they write documentation into how humans will read it, but also how LLM will read it, right? So it's how can you embed some parts into vector databases, how it can be queried via chatbots, how it can be used in test generation and validation into CI/CD pipelines, or whatever. So docs are no longer static, right? They are a moving part, and AI enable that. But it's not just read, right? The documentation is not just read anymore. It's parsed, it's segmented, it's vectorized, it's reassembled, it's summarized, and that will enable a new set of interactions with documentation, right? So AI can do great things. They can make your documentation, your API documentation generated at a cheaper, faster, and a more productive way. But the role of the API docs writer doesn't change, right? It doesn't change fundamentally. It changes on the way you deliver. It's more about how do you edit, how do you customize, not how you produce. The production is now cheap and we can produce a lot of text, right? But the who is the right person, what's the right level of explanation, what do I decide to document, what do I don't document is really the important part. Practical recommendation for this part, for me, it's not the most interesting one, but it's still extremely useful and valuable about what AI can do for the docs. First, audit your docs for LLM readiness, right? Do you have the right markup? Is it structured well enough? Did you chunk content well for embeddings, like for LLM to be able to really get vectors? So to be sure that they vectorize the right part of the docs based on the prompt you will use, right? Do you use a semantic structure? So that's really the how you can audit your docs for LLM readiness. There's also how you can build a prompt library. So some users may want to have some prompt to get code or to get use cases or part of your documentation. Give them these prompts, right? You used to give code samples, give prompt samples, right? So you have code samples against API calls or API examples. Do prompt samples also in the same part and build your prompt library. You can also experiment with embedded search. There are many tools like LLMs who are able to look for on your page and be able to crawl your page and embed your page. Check what they're able to deliver, right? How are you able to make a custom search experience with these LLMs? One other tips is the first step can be a chatbot for your doc. Just with a retrieval augmented generation doc data set. You can try, and at least that can be your first use step. Again, it's really small, but it's a good way to start and see what's wrong or not. You can also monitor questions, and little by little, you will be able to improve docs based on this chatbot, right? That's the first step. I know some people in the community are far beyond that, but for people who are just starting, that can be your first step. One other advice that can be done here is measure what matters. So it's not just like classic different proposals about just views, or clicks, but what are the successful queries? What are the search that gives the results, right? How many errors did I prevent? What are the prompts that people, with what prompts people come to my documentation, and what are the prompts when they interact with? So like this, I will be able to understand their intent, right? So not just instructions, but also the intent. That's a very important part here. So it's just some practical recommendation about what I consider an important, but not the most important word about what AI can do for your docs. But my question is now, what docs can do for your APIs, right? For AI, sorry, what your API docs can do for AI. That's the most important part, because with the previous part that I shared, things will not change. At some point, you can generate the best documentation possible. You can make it extremely easy. You can do prompt samples, code samples, whatever. At the end, we will still have these memes, we will still have these memes of developers who don't want to read documentation, where's the documentation? I am documentation, right? Or, programmers, crave for docs. No, they will not read the docs, right? Or would you prefer read the docs for 15 minutes or be on Stack Overflow or other type of website looking for a solution for 2 hours? Of course, this is what I will do. So at the end here, we will not change that. What documentation can be as good as possible. People at some point will want to try, test, and be successful immediately, right? So we can reduce that load, we can reduce that time, but it will still be there. But there's a new era that's coming that may completely change this mindset, right? Because at some point, this is just documentation we still build for humans who will build applications. But if we now build documentation that will automate API consumption by other software and other application, this will disappear, right? And this is, the big mindset shift that we've seen over the last 25 years, which is human readable versus machine readable. And especially in the last 2 years, we've seen a huge shift with AI. I will share you the link right after. But 8 years ago, Bruno Pedro, someone known in the API community, made an API assistant demo. So it was in 2016. It was the first chatbot era, right? About how you can query an API through directly a chatbot. So it's a YouTube video. I will be able to share the link. I couldn't share my whole screen, so I cannot see it live. But it was the first interaction. Like, okay, how do I do that with my APIs? Where do I find these endpoints? What are the parameters? And we're just chatting with its API. It was the first step when he was doing his company HQ. But that was, a proto AI, right? Proto AI assistant for API docs at the time. So it was 8 years ago. But of course, with LLM, things have changed a lot. Based on the last, let's say, 10, 15 years, a new term has emerged, which is developer experience. When tech writers used to write for humans, but especially for developers to be able to rebuild application on top. So we've seen many patterns going out from developer experience, minimize the first time for hello world, designing with consistency, predictability, offer great interactive tools, for people to be able to explore. There was a famous API Explorer from Apigee 10 years ago. So we've seen that coming, and companies who have the great developer experience were winning the heart of developers. And so when you win the heart of developers prefer to build on top of you versus others for the same capabilities. And then you will become a larger company because you assemble the work of others versus have to build everything yourself. If your documentation is great, if people love what you build and it's easy, at the end, they will build maybe 1,000 applications on top of you versus 100 on your competitors. And then you will win by the size of your ecosystem. So docs sells, simple docs sells, simple docs scales. And it's really important to understand that the shift of UX to DX, like developer experience, has been extremely important into defining success. And this is why we've built developer portals, and this is why we've built so many design tools for enabling developers to be as successful as possible, because developers, most of them don't like to read docs, they want to build. And so the easier way you make them build versus read will make them extremely happy, and it will be satisfying for them. So, for example, Twilio was known for having actionable errors. When an API gives an error, they were giving you the link in the documentation about how you can solve that error. All this part is part of the developer experience. Like, how can you help me build, not just read, right? So that's important, right? There's a last important part on developer experience, which is how you keep your docs, SDKs in sync with the code base and with the community, right? How do you automate things? This is the single source of truth part of documentation. And how can you be sure that the community still is aware of what's going on? How do you share change logs and everything? But this is still this human to, let's say, this human readable way for developers to build application, to build code, right? This is really this human to code part. And so based on developer experience, we've seen that it's better when we have one single source of truth. So we've begun to write specifications to be sure that the documentation at some point can be generated from the specifications. So we've seen many specifications, from WSDL to WADL, from RAML, API Blueprint, but we have, let's say, few who have stayed, right? So the most known is OpenAPI specification, right? All named with Swagger. We have also GraphQL SDL, and we have gRPC and Postman collection and async API, right? So for classic REST CRUD APIs is OpenAPI specifications, but for other type of protocol like asynchronous APIs has async, gRPC for microservices. And so we've been to document and to describe for machine-readable applications, APIs, to be able to have this single source of truth and to be able to generate docs from the code. So that's the main idea of docs as code, right? And code as docs. So that's really the mindset. But we say, okay, documentation is important, developer experience is important, that can win the heart of developers. But if we're not able to be sure that it's a single source of truth, remember, we have the intent, we have the instructions, but now it's the truth that we want. If we generate the docs from machine-readable document, that will be the truth, right? But my statement today is that the future is not docs as code, it's docs as context. A lot of people have said docs as code was the future, but actually I think it's just a transition for docs as context, and I will explain why. Because AI read all the docs. AI read all the docs. It reads your written doc, your code, it reads your text, it reads your code samples, it reads your SDK, it reads everything. So now AI will change the mindset of developers trying to read the minimum and to build, because now AI will read everything before building. And because they will be able to read everything before building, everything has to be in the right context. And that completely changed the thing. So we used to do the minimal docs possible for building stuff. And now we have AI who is not lazy, who has unlimited capability of reading. And so now it will read all the docs. So all docs, deprecated docs and everything will be part of the context. So it's a mindset shift that a lot of docs writers are not prepared to. So Docs 1.0 was text, Docs 2.0 was code, like code generation or code-generated documentation, and Docs 3.0 is really the context of all of this. And so for AI, we have new tools to be able to build that context. And this is the shift we're doing, right? And this is a term that some of you may know, but I've discovered last year that I really like, which is the shift from UX, from user experience to developer experience to agent experience, right? So now API docs writers used to invest time and resource on developer experience for developers to build great UX. But now you need also to invest in agent experience for agents to be able to deliver a great user experience. So now there is a duo that you need to monitor. So agent experience for docs, I will try to summarize some of the elements. So agent experience has some principles. There's a great website called agentexperience.com where you're able to get these in more details. But the goal is to be sure that agents will be like autonomous, let's say, machines or bots that will make interactions and do actions in the name of a user, right? So agent experience has some principle, like to be sure it's about human use cases, so human centricity. To be sure there is a contextual alignment, that it really understands the context of its intended use case and the data it has access to. That the website or the application is accessible for agents, that, because most of the agents today will be recognized as bots and will be forbidden to access. So you be sure you have to do that. You will need to have specific interactivity patterns. So you need to prepare path for agents and path for humans. So like this, agents know what they can do and how they can do it versus human interfaces, right? Agents need to declare themselves. They need to have a transparent identity. They need to be declared like application on developer portals, but agents to be declared, so to be authorized, so, and to be declared as agents from what company, what domain, and for what use cases they're able to do what they are to do. And also agent interaction differentiation in the fact that, the different use cases for different agents will be authorized at different levels, right? So that's really the main principle of agent experience. And so some best practices of agent experience, is to be sure that what you build is, again, still for humans and has intent of humans, right? Because it's still humans at the part. But how do you assess agent readiness of your developer portals or your website? How can you be sure agents can do what they are intended to do in the behalf of humans? That's extremely important to assess, right? So you need to optimize documentation for AI. You will need, and I will share some elements in the last part. You need to simplify access control for agents. You need to have protocols that enable agents to get authorizations from users, but being able to build what they want to build. And you need to also use agents yourself to test your own agent experience for your product. So you will need to crawl your documentation, to browse your developer portals, to sign up as an agent like yourself to check agent experience, right? So imagine the new world where not only humans will register to your developer portals to build applications, but also agents to make automated integrations to actually build a plugin and to build applications directly in the behalf of users or do connections between different APIs, right? So you need to prepare for that, right? This is the agent experience part. And this is a quote from Jensen Huang that I really like. So we are headed towards the future where all code will be essentially API calls to LLMs, with other LLMs in turn calling other LLMs by APIs, etc., etc. So the future will be AI calling other AI by LLMs to the end user applications. So this will evolve and evolve and evolve, and the orchestration of many agents, many AIs and many APIs will be at scale. It will be not just one agent for one API, but it will be one agent for one API calling another agent for another API and everything, right? So that will be really going at scale. So a few things you need to consider before wrapping up. A few documents, the LLM, there's an LLM.txt file where you will be able to describe your website information for LLMs. That's the first tool that you can use to be sure you describe your documentation, right, to be browsable and to be embeddable by LLMs, right, LLM.txt. Of course, there is OpenAPI specifications that describe your API in a machine-readable way. So like this, agents can read your API, what the methods, what their parameters, what the path, and what the whole reference, and be able to interact with it. There is also agent.json, which is another standard about how you can describe contracts for APIs and agent interactions built on top of OpenAPI. So the agent.json is another way to interact. Like this. There is another one that's really more famous, which is MCP, Model Context Protocol, right? Developed by Anthropic. Really, that will define a clear path about what interactions an agent can have with your API. Let's say in more simple way, or more structured way, that having to register, having to create an application, having to go to your full developer experience, right? It's the kind of a shortcut for agents to your API versus the classic developer experience. I may simplify here a little bit, but this is really what has some success. It has a lot of loopholes, but some success. There is Agent Communication Protocol. It's a MCP by IBM. Again, that's another one. But just to say, as a documentation writer, you will need to understand all this context of protocols and contexts, right? So be sure you decide the right ones and be sure you build for all these different experiences. There is agency, which is for now agent-to-agent collaboration, which is another one mostly run by Cisco, Longchain, and Galileo. And again, I can name a few more. There is agent auth. There is auth, right? Auth for AI agents, like to manage authorization between agents. Again, I will give access to the slide so you can see the maximum of protocols you need to be sure to integrate with, to respect. So your docs, your API docs, is also browsable, discoverable, and interpretable by agents. In the last 2 minutes I have, the future jobs of doc writers for me in the big wave of that will be resumed in a few points. So first, your job will evolve. The job will evolve not just for humans, not just for developer experience, but for agent experience. So you will need to structure everything semantically, right? To be sure that you chunk content from machine parsing, right? No, be ready for machines. Write like you're training an AI, right? Input, output, context, knowledge retrieval, be explicit, define acronyms to be sure the AI doesn't make mistakes, right? You think modular, one concept per block to avoid confusion by LLMs, to avoid hallucinations, to avoid issues, and be sure that they're able to retrieve the data they want for a specific prompt. Embrace description standards, OpenAPI, async API, JSON schema, and others, right? That will be the key to enable to be sure you master a single source of truth. You will also need to create dual experience, developer experience, agent experience. So I don't know, do we need to call DAX or DAX or whatever, that it will be as much developer usability as much as agent interpretability, right? So now test your LMs. Can ChatGPT or GitHub Copilot or Cursor answer this from my API docs, right? Does this prompt give the right answer from my docs, right? Write prompts alongside docs. It's not about code samples. It's also prompt samples, prompt examples, right? So that's an example. Collaborate with AI, don't compete. AI handle boilerplate in first draft, but your energy will be now more in information architecture, pedagogy, tone, and empathy, right? It's not just about writing; it's mostly API docs, editing, right? More than writing. Monitor what agents get wrong. Let's remind that ChatGPT, for example, has still 20 to 30% hallucination, and LMs can get wrong a lot of the times. So track fail chatbot response. Use these as feedback loops. What classical docs is good, what generated docs is good at, need to monitor, and teach machine how to teach others. Docs are not just reference; they are now training data. That's a big mindset. They're not just a reference; they're training data for other machines. So be sure you understand that when you write docs. And last but not least, embrace the paradigm shift. The job is no longer to explain software; it's to make knowledge executable by people and machines. So I will just finish by that. AI is a big wave, but if you can stop the wave, you can still learn to surf. And I hope this introduction talk for the day 2 give you the envy to learn how to surf on the wave as an API docs writer. Thank you very much.